One Friday afternoon, he came home from work early, unbuttoned the starched black shirt of his policeman's uniform, and opened a quart of Old Granddad. I smelled the whiskey as soon as I walked into the living room. Somehow he'd spilled some of it on the carpet in front of the sofa where he sat. I tried to sneak past him to the narrow hallway and the bedroom I shared with my two younger brothers, but he spotted me out of the corner of his eye. Just as he let the empty bottle fly, I slammed the hallway's pocket door closed. It crashed against the shut door with a sound like a gunshot. A few weekends later, I wasn't so lucky. The family was having a Sabbath barbecue in the backyard. Sunday afternoons happened to be the most dangerous time to be around him. That's when he'd be nursing a major hangover, picked up the night before at the local VFW post, where the drinks were cheap and plentiful. One of my brothers had a toy car made of metal and painted bright yellow. I guess it was supposed to be a little taxi cab. I tried to wrestle it away from him, and he let out a scream that could have woke the dead. The old man snatched up a long, narrow wooden pole he'd purchased to stake up a recently planted sapling. Raising the pole over his shoulder, he flung it violently in my direction. Everyone watched, frozen in place, including me, as it cartwheeled across the yard like a deranged helicopter blade and slammed into my forehead. The impact knocked me backwards and I crumpled onto the patchy lawn. Barely conscious, I felt the warm blood begin to run down my temple. "Is he dead?" said one of my brothers as he leaned over to take a good look at the nasty gash. My mother pushed him aside, helped me to my feet, and led me into the house. She and I and the old man stood before the kitchen sink as she wiped away the blood. I should have been taken to a doctor for stitches, but instead, she laid a strip of gauze over the cut and taped it tightly into place as I moaned. While the old man remained standing alone near the sink, Mom sat me down across from her at the kitchen table. "When you get to school tomorrow morning," she instructed firmly, staring into my eyes, "you are going to tell your teacher you fell while you were playing and banged your head on a rock." Still feeling woozy, I looked past her to the old man.
10 minutes.
His jaw tightly set. He stared at the blank wall next to the refrigerator and shook his head. I assumed he was still angry with me and shuddered at the thought. In the weeks that followed, though, I noticed a change in him. He still drank as much as ever, but he was no longer mean to me. Once, he even glanced over from where he sat at the VFW post bar and smiled crookedly in my direction. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. I continued to keep my distance, though. I wasn't taking any chances. At about the same time, another man suddenly appeared in our lives. His name was Jack. Younger than the old man, he was slim and outgoing, with a goatee and a full head of jet black hair framing his handsome features. He joined us for dinner several times a week and even drove the family to Newport Beach in his new Ford station wagon for afternoons at the seaside. And he told jokes that made Mom laugh. But the old man didn't seem to think they were funny. "Who's Jack?" I asked Mom one day. "What do you mean?" "Why is he always around?" "He's a family friend." Late on a Saturday afternoon, the old man and I were at opposite ends of the sofa, watching a Dodgers-Giants game on our black and white TV. Being around him made me nervous, but we only had one TV, and I loved the Dodgers. So did he. In fact, it was the only thing we had in common. It was the top of the sixth inning. The Dodgers were way behind, and he was on his fourth glass of booze when the pocket door abruptly slid open and Mom stepped into the living room. Wearing a colorful, tight-fitting dress, her red hair was combed back in a way I hadn't seen previously. She looked prettier than ever. As she stopped before us, the old man's face dropped. "What's this all about?" he said. "I'm going to a movie with some girlfriends." "Don't go." He sounded desperate. I'd never before heard that tone in his voice. "Why shouldn't I? All you're going to do is spend the night getting sloshed. You don't need me around." "Stay with us," he pleaded, slurring his words. She glanced at me, but didn't say anything. While we watched, she pulled the front door open and disappeared. The old man looked down at me. "She's going to meet Jack," he muttered. "I'm sure of it." Then he buried his face in his hands and began to sob. I slipped down the hallway. My brothers were sprawled on the bedroom's floor playing checkers. "How's the game?" one of them asked. "The Dodgers are getting their butts kicked." He sat upright. "I'm going to watch some TV." "Not right now," I said. "Dad's still in there, and he's not feeling very good." Soon Jack disappeared from our lives as suddenly as he'd appeared, and the old man stopped drinking. It was many years later before I came to understand the connection between those two events. To celebrate our parents' 20th wedding anniversary, my brothers and I scraped together enough dollar bills and change to treat them to dinner at a little Italian restaurant in the old part of town. Afterwards, we returned to the house. The old man grabbed a bottle of 7-Up, and we took our usual places in front of the TV, while the rest of the family filed down the hallway. Though he hadn't touched me for a long time, I still found him intimidating. So the words I uttered that night surprised even me. "Why'd you stop drinking?" I said. He stared at the TV screen for a few seconds before answering. "When I first joined the department, I'd work the night shift sometimes," he began, keeping his eyes on the game. "One night, we got a call from a woman who said a peeping Tom was hanging around her house. I recognized her name right away. She was the ex-wife of another officer." He was still staring at the TV. The next day, I was off. On a hunch, I asked her ex to meet me at the VFW post. He leaned back on the sofa and glanced my way. The guy always seemed weird to me, very unsure of himself. Not what you expect in a cop. Anyway, we had a drink or two, and I told him about the call from his ex-wife. The old man paused and scratched at the back of his ear. He didn't say much at first, but he acted nervous, rubbing his hands together on the bar top. Then he picked up his glass and swallowed the rest of the bourbon down in one gulp. That's when he turned and told me, "Sometimes late at night, I can't sleep. So I drive over to my old house and walk around outside in the dark." He lowered his face, like he was ashamed. "I look through the windows," he said, "and remember how it used to be between her and me." The old man set down the 7-Up and gazed at me. "I didn't want my life to turn out like that," he said lowly. He leaned towards me, slowly raised one hand to the side of my face, and drew the tips of his fingers gently across the scar on my forehead. I knew this was the closest thing to an apology that I'd ever get. As I watched, my eyes filled with tears. He lowered his hand and turned back to the screen. It was the top of the ninth, and the Dodgers had a big lead.